it was hazardous with the, one of the things was that we did about 4 or 5 of these thrill pictures, and it was hard to keep from being established as a thrill comedian.
Yeah.
Because that was just a small part of what we did.
Harold Lloyd was an ordinary American businessman who lived a conventional life. He'd get up in the morning, he'd go to work. His work was being a genius.
I would say he was one of the most charismatic innovators of film comedy in the early days.
The current generation of young people, the 20-year-olds, don't know anything about Harold Lloyd. You say something about Harold Lloyd and they say, who?
It always disturbs me a little if someone says, who was Harold Lloyd? Because, my God, he was a giant figure.
Harold's friend the giant has toothache. How can he pull the tooth? Harold Lloyd always began with a simple idea and built his gags upon it. In these vaults lie the films and scrapbooks of a master comedian. Once he rivaled Chaplin. Now Harold Lloyd is hardly more than a name in the history books. He was not a born clown. He had none of the childhood vaudeville training of Chaplin or Keaton. Yet he made more films than the two of them put together. He became one of the richest men in Hollywood. He was born here, in Birchwood, Nebraska, in 1893. A classic American success story. Lloyd liked to recall the Tom Sawyer quality of his boyhood.
Harold's family were poor people, and Harold really learned to live from hand to mouth. He often had a story to me that he learned the value of a nickel by going to a bakery and getting a sugar donut. And maybe some of this hand-to-mouth existence had a lot to do with some of his future experiences in the motion picture business. The poor kid had always come out ahead by being smart.
Harold's father ran just such a lunch counter as this, one of many ideas that failed. He had a sense of charm, but none of business, although his nickname was Foxy. Harold's mother regretted marrying Foxy. She resented the constant moves the family had to make, and the constant changes of schools for Harold and his elder brother, Gaylord. As a result, Harold was virtually self-educated. He drew upon his childhood for his films. But he portrayed himself as the boy he wasn't. At Durango, Colorado, he spent 3 of his teenage years.
Well, I think he was the most popular kid in the neighborhood. A one-person show. And with him, it was always follow the leader, and he was always the leader. So we climbed all over the churches. If you've been around the St. Mark's Church, you know, you could climb up on the stonework, holding on to the edge and inching your way up till you got to the peak. And it was not unusual for Harold Lloyd to go up one side and some kid up the other, and before you could get up there, why, he'd be coming down.
Harold displayed other skills. Besides boxing, he astonished the boys with his magic tricks.
He would sell you a trick if you want to buy them. Tell you what, but he'd never explain it to you.
Like his mother, Harold was passionate about the theatre, and John Lane Connor, who ran a travelling stock company, had become his mentor.
I started when I was about 12 years old. In fact, I did everything in the theater, from usher, candy butcher, property man, assistant stage manager. Oh, I went on through the whole gamut. But all of this gave you tremendous experience.
Foxy, now divorced, won $3,000 after an accident. He wanted to go east, Harold west, to join Connor.
My grandfather and my father stood at the crossroads, and they flipped a nickel, and it was heads or tails. I think tails would go to New York, and heads would go to California. Isn't that amazing? And of course it came up California.
That was fate. He admired the Chinese idea of luck. Luck was a tremendous thing to Harold. Some ways you could get luck. If you didn't follow his particular routine, he would lose his luck.
They went to San Diego, where Harold joined John Connor's School of Expression. He also enrolled in high school and acted in school plays, determined to become a great dramatic actor. The Edison Company visited San Diego in 1913 and asked Connor to provide extras. Harold Lloyd's first appearance on the screen. He's the Indian serving drinks in the background. Hardly noticeable unless we enlarge the frame. But there was no more work like this. When his father's money ran out, they went to Los Angeles. There was little work here either, and Harold and Foxy were soon destitute. But extra work in films paid the rent. And so Harold went to Hollywood on the streetcar and met the man who had changed his life, Hal Roach.
All of the extras are looking for a job or in the street in front of the Universal, and Harold Lloyd and Frank Brzezicki, who afterwards was a very big director, and I were there, each having a different way to get a job. Harold Lloyd had a friend that made little pictures of him on Main Street, and he took every makeup he could think of, and when they were casting where there was an Indian or a cowboy or whatever it was, he had a picture for that makeup, and he'd show the assistant director.
And I remember one time going to the old Biograph, to the casting director there, and I took out this little portfolio of mine, and he said, Lloyd, you're not the picture type.
It was one more setback, but he persevered. He finally broke into a studio by subterfuge, an experience he turned into a comedy 5 years later. At the time, Lloyd had no thought of being a comedian. He worked hard at straight roles. At the birth of Samson, Roach and Lloyd were the chief eunuchs. They played Hottentots together in this Wizard of Oz story. Then Roach landed a bigger part, the Cowardly Lion, and a windfall.
Finally, I got to the point where I owned my own company. And the first person that I engaged was Harold Lloyd, for a very simple reason. He was the best hard-working actor I ever saw.
They became close friends and started learning together how to make pictures.
We picked the people up on the street corners, that is the actors and the cameramen and so on. And we made pictures in the park, pictures on the beach, pictures in somebody's backyard and so on. But we didn't have any studio until we sold the 3 dramatic pictures to Universal at a profit.
Eventually, they shared studio space at the old Bradbury Mansion in downtown Los Angeles, where an actress called Jane Novak had just been turned down for a job.
These 4 young men were sitting on the floor across the room from us, and one of them came up and asked me how I would like to work for him, and it was Hal Roach.
Roach cast Jane Novak in a number of comedies with Harold Lloyd. Roach had quarreled with a comic he'd engaged, and Lloyd agreed to help out. Like other comics, his character was an imitation of Charlie Chaplin. He got $5 a day. Roy Stewart, leading man in the dramas, got $10. Lloyd told the story at a lecture.
So I thought I was as important as Roy, and so I said to him, I got to have $10 a day. He said, but Harold, we can't afford it. I said, but you're paying Roy? Well, he says he won't work for any less. So I quit, too. And that's how I went to Sennett.
Max Sennett had discovered most of the great comedians. He hardly noticed Lloyd. But at least Harold learned to pratfall.
But I was never too happy, and then Roach came after me. We had done a picture called Just Nuts that Roach was offered a fine contract before if he could get back the principals, and I was the main principal, and of course he came and offered me a tremendous sum of about $50 a week.
Sennett's top comic, Ford Sterling, was acting with Lloyd.
He says, oh my God, Lloyd, he said, what do you want to go with a little one-horse independent company like that for? And he said, I don't think that you should really go in for this comedy stuff. He said, you're the kind of an actor, he said, like Bobby Harron. That was the boy with D.W. Griffith. He said, don't go with Roach. I said, no. I said, I think I'm going to go there. I'm going to be the comedian. And I said, if I go there, I'll be the big fish in the little pond rather than the little fish here.
At last he felt wanted, but he needed a new comedy character.
Finally got a character that we called Lonesome Luke, and that was really a kind of a half-shoot imitation of Chaplin. Although I tried to be different, I put on tight clothes where Charlie had loose ones, and I divided my mustache. And that went on for a long time, and was quite successful, but not really good.
The films were handled by Pathé, who ordered 1 a week. Roach himself directed and surrounded Lloyd with a stock company, including a 15-year-old leading lady, Bebe Daniels. And a comic from Australia, Snub Pollard. Their comedy was knockabout, Lloyd's character aggressive. Roach grabbed his pictures wherever he could.
Well, the whole downtown of Los Angeles became my property room.
When the Navy opened a battleship for recruiting, Roach grabbed that too. No one cared about the sailors in the background, more visible in this enlargement. Audiences didn't care either. Luke was now Pathy's star comedian, as Andrew Stone discovered when he ran a theater for children near San Francisco.
All those shows I ran, Lonesome Luke's with Harold Lloyd seemed to be the most popular, even more popular than the Chaplins. He seemed to have more gags than Charlie Chaplin, although, of course, he didn't have Charlie Chaplin's style.
But I had the feeling that I would never get any farther with Lonesome Luke than I had, because underneath it all, he was a comedy character that couldn't possibly rise to the heights that Chaplin had. And in some ways, while you didn't directly try to imitate Chaplin, he was a character that dropped into that category.
Screen comedy was dominated by grotesques. Luke was part of this convention, and Pathé and Roach wanted no change. But Roach was persuaded.
This actor that played the drunk for us came on the set with a pair of glasses without any lenses in them, but it completely changed his entire character. So the next day I had him bring me a whole bunch of rims, and we tried them on Harold, and of course that's when he increased his value 500 or 600%.
Lloyd remembered it differently.
That wasn't Roach's idea. That was purely my own idea. Roach didn't want me to change in it. And when I finally decided and told him I was going to quit, and they said, all right, we don't know just what crazy idea or how you want to do this, Lloyd. We're going to dump it into your lap. And they said, Lloyd, go ahead.
New clothes, but hardly a new character. A certain style, but the same old knockabout. For Lloyd was still playing Lonesome Luke, with glasses. As a comic, he was a slow developer. But in 1918, audiences liked his slapstick just the way it was.
My sister and I used to go every week. We loved, I think, seeing his films because there was so much fast, visible action. We had a lot to talk about when we got out of the theater. Do you remember the spot where, and we would start describing this, and each of us would fight to get in our favorite description, our favorite event. If I have an image, it would just be of a spinning top.
But in this sort of film, anyone could wear the glasses, and did. When Lloyd quit the studio, Roach put the glasses on director Alf Goulding, but not for long. The row had again been over money. Lloyd won a new contract, and then he saw a film he'd never forget. This film, about a meek parson who becomes a fighter, gave Lloyd the idea for the glasses, so he claimed. But it came out a year later than he remembered. What it must have given him was a clue to his character. The new Harold Lloyd would be more human, more ingenious. Lloyd was now gaining a distinct personality, like Chaplin.
Chaplin wasn't anything like us. In fact, part of his interest and appeal was his strangeness, I do think. And I think the same is true of Keaton to a lesser degree, perhaps, but nonetheless. So, but Harold Lloyd was very much like us. He was like our friends. He was like the kids we knew on the block.
Thanks to the glasses, romances were more convincing, his personality more appealing.
The idea, you could think of a person wearing glasses as being an erudite, studious person, but you didn't have to be that way, therefore it belied your appearance.
Frank Terry helped think up gags like these, one of the first of Lloyd's many gag men. He'd worked with Fred Carno in England and helped Lloyd achieve his new ingenuity. Hal Roach was now just one of Lloyd's directors. As his studio expanded, so did Lloyd's production team. Roach took Snub Pollard for his own series, making Lloyd a star on his own, with his leading lady, Bebe Daniels. They had worked together for 4 years. Was their relationship anything more than just professional?
Just professional? No. What's another word for it? I know they had a special feeling for each other. They were in love. They were going to marry. They were gorgeous together. Dancing was a big deal. They gave contests, and Harold and Bebe used to walk away with the cups. They're beautiful dancers.
But Bebe wanted stardom. She felt Harold would never be a really great comedian.
She was ambitious. So Harold had to let her go. He had to get someone in her place.
Lloyd chose Mildred Davis. He'd seen her in this minor comedy. Her debut for Lloyd was in this two-reeler. But the real star was a 6-year-old.
With Harold, it was like we were play acting together. And he could have been an older brother, an uncle, somebody I really was attached to. It was so easy that now I look back, I know it was a very special kind of relationship. The set we worked on was at Universal. It was the old New York set. Was very inventive and had a sense of how he wanted things done. In a sense, I think he directed to some extent.
Lloyd was no longer just a comic who copied others. He directed his directors. And he was becoming an influential filmmaker. One who would be influenced was Buster Keaton. Lloyd, Keaton. Pathé were delighted with Lloyd. By 1919, he was climbing still higher at the box office. That same year, he began a film in which he tried to kill himself. Halfway through, he posed for publicity pictures. Roy Seawright was at the studio.
He's looking around. Right beside him was the prop table, covered with dishes and so forth that needed on the set. And among the dishes and so forth was a prop bomb, a typical Bolshevik bomb with a long white wick. he took out a cigarette and lit it. And then he took a puff, and then he looked over the table, and you could almost see it hit him again. So he reached over and picked up that bomb, brought it up here, looked at it, and then put it up against his cigarette and lit the bomb.
Then I realized that it wouldn't make a good picture. So the only thing that saved my life was that I was going to say, it's no good now. So as I said, it, and as I lowered it here, the bomb went off. Went right straight up and blew a big hole about that big in the ceiling.
Then all bedlam broke loose. Everybody was running around here, call the hospital, call the ambulance, call the doctor, everything else. And now the pain has just now finally settling in. And he was still standing in his same marks where the bomb went off. And he grabbed his wrist. The thumb was gone. The first finger here was dangling, hanging right down in the front, swinging around. And he looked at it, and you could see the look of terror that came over his face. He just actually hit his face now, a registering shock that we were all registered before at the explosion.
Lloyd wondered if he had a life to look forward to, let alone a career. Harold Lloyd's career seemed to have reached a catastrophic end after the explosion. An end foreseen, strangely enough, in one of his old comedies.
He was not depressed. He was just like the usual Harold. You would never find Harold in any emotional state of any kind.
Flowers and cards poured in from Roscoe Arbuckle, B.B. Daniels, Mildred Davis.
We knew that wouldn't be the end of his career. Just to have your fingers blown off? No, not Harold.
As his wounds healed, his enthusiasm returned. If he couldn't act, he could always direct. He was determined to make bigger and better pictures. Strolling down Broadway on a trip to New York, Lloyd saw his name in lights at the Strand Theatre. The title couldn't have been more apt, nor the sight of the crowds better for his morale. Back in Los Angeles, he picked up where he left off. If we enlarge the frame, we can see that in this early scene, his right hand is normal. After his accident, there's something odd about it.
I figured in some way there could be a glove done in some way to cover up for the thumb and finger that he lost. And when I thought of gloves, I thought of Sam Goldwyn, who was a glove salesman to start with.
Goldwyn recommended a firm which created a remarkable glove, fine-fitting, with two fingers stitched together, inside which was a false finger and thumb. The leather was stretched tight over the hand. When the hand moved, the missing fingers appeared to move normally with it. Once it was covered in makeup, the device was hard to spot, even if we enlarged the picture. Appearing in Haunted Spooks was a small boy, Ernest Morrison, known as Sunshine Sammy. Actors in blackface had been the rule until Roach brought Morrison to the studio.
There was no prejudice in Hal Roach's studio. I didn't even know I was a black person.
Sunshine Sammy was cast in the Lloyd two-reeler, Get Out and Get Under.
I think Hal Roach was directing, though, but Harold had things under his hand. He was more, he told me, now you do so-and-so, and I said, okay, so-and-so, that. Be in the sun, be here, and be there. So he was telling me these things because he already had figured out what should happen.
Sammy plays a boy consumed with curiosity. He'd have been kicked out of the picture by the old Harold Lloyd, but the new Harold plays with him. Lloyd has found his character and his style.
Everybody around him loved the man. He was that sort of person. When you looked at what he had done, if it wasn't a big laugh, you had a big smile on your face. a perfectionist. Everything he did, he took time for. He never did a thing in a hurry.
By 1920, Lloyd was seen as a serious threat to Chaplin, who was slowing up. Lloyd's output was higher, and he developed an efficient system. A vital part of that system was the preview, showing a film to an audience to judge their reaction. Lloyd came to depend on the preview, once cutting a whole reel from a three-reeler. A Sailor-Made Man was previewed at 4 reels. The audience liked it so much, Lloyd left it that way. Accidentally, his first feature-length comedy.
But we didn't think we wanted to make long pictures, so the next picture we started as a 2-reeler. And that was probably one of the best pictures I ever made, called Grandma's Boy.
This was the first film in which Lloyd decided character was to be more important than comedy. He played a hopeless coward, something he'd never done before. Lloyd must have been impressed by Charles Ray. He often played the timid young man who becomes a hero, a favorite Lloyd theme from now on. Harold's grandmother gives him a talisman belonging to his grandfather. It had made him a hero of the Civil War.
It was an idea that I'd had, mind over matter, and I'd had it for a couple of years. And the theme was so strong, and in order to develop it, we never felt that we could do it justice in 2 reels, so it went on and on and on, and finally it became 5 reels.
We previewed it in Pasadena. As soon as we went where he's doing it straight, the audience lost all interest. And it took us a long time to get them to laugh again. And just as we got them laughing, then we go into this other chase, which is dramatic, and stop laughing. They walked out, there was nothing. He was so disappointed because he thought he was going to be able to, get a big hit out of being a dramatic actor.
The film had a flashback to the Civil War.
The thing was that we had made this purely with this dramatic intent, and we hadn't put the business or gags into it that we had in some of the other ones. And while there was great heart to it, it lacked that laughter that we had been getting in so many of the other pictures. And when we came out, Roach was very put out about the whole thing. He said, look, we're making comedies. Let's get back to making comedies. Let's take all this heart stuff and get rid of it.
And 2 o'clock in the morning, I said, Harold, we got a great picture. All we got to do is to make 2 sequences over. And then next morning, I called in all the writers, and I said, I will start out with the first gag.
Harold is pursuing a tramp who has terrorized the countryside.
Harold has got a lasso, and he is going to lasso the heavy. And Harold throws the lasso, but instead of catching the heavy, he catches a post, and that pulls him out. So now he's alone with a guy that he's scared to death of.
Roach was perfectly right that we should have more laughs in it. And I was right that we should leave the heart into it. So we We went back and we embellished the picture with probably about 20 new pieces of business.
Harold Lloyd was not a comedian, but he was the best actor to act the part of a comedian of any person I ever saw.
Harold is wearing his grandfather's suit, which he suddenly realizes is full of mothballs. Armed with his talisman, Harold has no fear. Not until the very end does Harold learn the talisman is a fake. The courage is within him. It had taken 6 months for Lloyd and director Fred Neumeyer to complete the film. It was a huge success. Chaplin and Keaton praised it highly. So did the critics. It launched a new style of feature comedy. Lloyd wanted to do more than make people laugh. In his next feature, he tried out an idea on 8-year-old Jack Davis.
He wasn't sure he was really scaring people, but he came out of on a set that was a haunted house, and he's supposed to slide down the stairs and startle the people in the room, frighten them. And he put me there. This was not shooting. We're not on film. And he wanted to know if it would frighten me, and I cried when he jumped at me. So that convinced him then it's pretty real.
For years, Lloyd had been trying to frighten his audiences. His thrill pictures came about thanks to the topography of Los Angeles. The Bradbury Mansion studio was built on a hill. The Hill Street Tunnel ran beneath. Streetcars carried people up the hill to a terrace. This shot was taken on the terrace overlooking Hill Street. Hal Roach came upon the effect by accident when he was trying to film a simple shot of 2 people on the terrace.
But the cameraman did not get the fence in, and it looked like these people were way up in the air. And I got the idea. That's where I got the idea.
Roach and Lloyd exploited the discovery in their first thrill picture. The impression of height was utterly convincing. In the next thrill picture, a sleepwalking Mildred leaves a drunken Harold stranded. The facade was again built over the Hill Street tunnel, and they added to the effect with these shots taken from a tall building. Thanks to a more elaborate set at Hill Street, Never Weaken took the terror still further. Harold is once again trying to commit suicide. Never Weaken was so cleverly made, it seemed impossible for Lloyd to outdo it. But the 20s were an age of stunt performers and what were known as human flies. Lloyd saw one in action in Los Angeles.
There was a tremendous crowd there, maybe 200 or 300 people or more. And I inquired what was going on. They said, a man's going to scale this building. And I said, really? So I stood around and sure did. They came in, they had a ceremony, they introduced him, and he started climbing, and he got about 3 floors, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I just knew he was going to be killed. So I went around the corner where I couldn't see him, and lots of people were up there too, and I said, where is he now? I said, oh, he's about the 5th floor. So I peeked around and waited until he finally got to the top. And of course, the crowd were absolutely thrilled, and it had such a reaction on this group of people and on myself that I said, well, now, if it can have that, and you do it properly on the screen, it should have the same results.
The human fly was Bill Struthers, and Lloyd hired him to play in his next thrill picture, which would feature a daredevil climb and a new technique. In the story, Harold gets Struthers to do the climb as publicity for the store he works in. Harold plays a harassed salesman. He devises the stunt to save his job. But he has to start the climb himself, because Struthers is in trouble with a neighborhood cop. Urged on by the crowd, Harold faces more than just a climb. Lloyd and his gag men put in his path every peril imaginable.
You see, when we did this, though, it was different from what if they tried to do it today. Today they have a certain type of trick photography and another called process. We actually did this in those days. I was up just as high as you see me in the film.
How could he be? The Hill Street Tunnel was never so high. Lloyd allowed no photograph to reveal his secret. But pictures of a later climb from his sound film, Feet First, were found in his vault. These show facades built perilously near the edge. The sets enabled the camera to give the sense of height. Each stage of the climb was on a higher building. The camera angles had to be carefully chosen so the perspective of the set matched the existing buildings. Some of those buildings still exist. By lining them up, we can reveal a brilliantly executed illusion. The set is on the opposite side of the street to the real buildings. For some shots, a platform was also needed.
There was no railings around it. We piled mattresses on it, and if you let your headlight flat, you could bounce off of it, and then there wouldn't be much need for the platform.
Only one person survives who saw the scene being shot.
He hung on to the hands of the clock, I can never forget that, for long periods of time. And they would be shooting a certain sequence, and you hear them say, cut, and there was no relief. Harold would still hang there, and I remember he could put his toes in the bricks, to relieve, the total pressure.
He also wore special shoes designed for wire walkers. The long shots could clearly not be done by Harold Lloyd.
When you got on the real buildings, you didn't have much protection except the sidewalk. You were on your own then.
The double on Feet First was Harvey Parry.
Now say that you were a producer. Now I'm your star. Do you want me to go out and break my neck? Your picture won't be finished. You'll lay off people and it'll cost you tremendous. And besides, the insurance company wouldn't allow it.
The double on Safety Last was Bill Struthers.
In climbing a building, your hands are everything, not your feet. Your feet can slip. But if you lose your grip with your hands, you're back.
And Lloyd had only one complete hand. The reaction to the film was unprecedented. People fainted. Nurses were on duty at theatres. Harold becomes a hero. And Lloyd, the filmmaker, after more than 150 films, is hailed as one of the greatest comedians in the world. And he has one last trick, what Lloyd called the topper.